Now you have to say something important. Everybody got quiet.
Well, that's the strategic pause. Right? So welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here with us today. I think this is going to be a very insightful, and if you're up on the news, very timely conversation on revitalizing our shore infrastructure, and I'm going to inject here into the title, as a means to meet our modern naval demands. What I like about this topic is that it acknowledges the necessity of shoreside infrastructure to enable America to produce the Navy it needs. More importantly, if you read into the description, it highlights the importance of our ports and our maritime economy. So if you're thinking, but wait, I thought we were here to talk about shipyards, don't worry, you're not in the wrong breakout session, you're in the right place. We are going to talk about shipyards, but I want to focus on the fact that naval forces are born of many things. And while ships may be assembled in a shipyard, the iron ore that became the steel wasn't mined below the graving dock. Neither were the miles of electrical cable, the equipment, the engine, and so on. So to have a successful shipyard, you need a fully integrated and carefully managed supply chain with the ports to support it. Likewise, the more commercial ships a nation produces, the more robust, efficient, and resilient that supply chain becomes, which would naturally create opportunities to increase the efficiency and competitiveness of naval construction and provide the government with more repair yards to choose from. So you need the shipyards, and you need the supply chains and the ports. What else do you need to create naval forces? Funding, technology. Our adversaries do a lot of R&D, which they refer to as rip off and deploy. Well, Aristotle said that if the art of shipbuilding were in the wood, ships would exist by nature. So you need a skilled workforce. And to create the pool of skilled labor, you need a strong maritime economy. That means ports, shipyards, a merchant marine, and maritime economies. Personally, I know a lot of former mariners who now design ships. It's a natural and well-established pathway for marine engineering talent. That when your spouses tell you it's time to get off a ship and it's time to come ashore, a lot of them go work for the Navy or go work in our commercial shipyards. And this is where I've seen our adversaries benefit tremendously from the overlapping skill sets between their growing maritime industries and naval ship production. And to solve these challenges, I'm going to pass the baton now to our panelists, who are going to take a look at the challenges from their perspectives. And that includes our NAVFAC commander, Rear Admiral Dean VanderLey, as well as Mr. Mark Edelson, who serves as the Navy's Program Executive Officer for Industrial Infrastructure. We also have the Maritime Administration's Deputy Associate Administrator for Ports and Waterways, Ms. Tretha Chromey. And last but not least, Mr. Roger Camp, Senior Director for Business Development, Naval Programs at Hanwha Defense USA. So we have Navy, maritime, and defense contractor perspectives. To start off the discussion, let's frame out the problems and opportunities, and please explain from your perspective, what are these naval demands, and what challenges do you see in meeting them through our existing shoreside infrastructure capabilities? And Admiral, let's start with you. How do you see it from the NAVFAC perspective?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's a good way to start. So very, very simply, our shore infrastructure on our Navy bases primarily are the place where we train our sailors and maintain our ships and warfare platforms, among other things. So very critical to the ultimate readiness of our forces. The challenges that we have with our shore infrastructure, I would say, three things broadly. One is condition. So in many cases, no surprise, our Navy bases, and especially our shipyards, are very old. And so we, in many cases, have condition challenges. Configuration challenges, and Mark can probably talk about this more, but the shipyards where we maintain, especially our carriers and submarines, they were constructed at a time where we were building conventional ships, and now we're using them to maintain nuclear-powered vessels, and so much different mission. So condition, configuration, and then I would also say affordability. So I've illustrated that we have challenges with that, and but of course there's never enough money. So those are you throw those three things together, and those are the things that really are the focus of my attention. So
condition, configuration, affordability. Got it. Mark, do you have a similar take?
Absolutely, and thank you much. And re-emphasize your point on America being a maritime nation. Even one of my other aspects is our construction battalions, and I would note they are homeported in Gulfport, Mississippi, and Port Hueneme. So even our construction folks, we rely on that ability to get them deployed. We're building a dry dock in Pearl Harbor right now. The steel for that left Houston, went through the Panama Canal to get to Hawaii. So even within one of our own projects, we have to rely on our maritime status to do that. As the Admiral mentioned, the shipyards, the 4 public shipyards that maintain those nuclear vessels, were built at a different time. The youngest, Pearl Harbor, was founded in 1908. And after 100 years, it's probably time to do something. I often talk about our last dry dock at a public shipyard was finished in 1962. It was built for CV Forrestal, no N in the name, right? That's our most recent dry dock, and it's really the shipyard's a microcosm of what Chief sees throughout, whether you're talking airfields that were fantastic in World War II, and now we have to land P-8s on them. The shipyards are the same thing, and I would add to those Cs the capacity. Everything has gotten bigger and needs more power. Now, to give you a sense, the Ford-class carrier takes double the electrical load of the Nimitz. And you take shipyards that were built in the 18th century, up in Maine or in Norfolk, and have hundreds of power outages a year, and now say, hey, let me double what the power requirement is. It's time to do something. Unfortunately, the Navy's recognized that foundational element of our installations to all the combat power, and we're benefiting from historic investments in the shipyards to get after all those things. Get it, change the size so the black sinky things and the gray floaty things can fit into the dry dock, pull another electrical cable in, and then things that were, we have a building that we just rehabbed up in Portsmouth. We have the pictures of 3 submarines being built inside the building, right, and launched. We just used the same shell, the same foundation, historic building. Luckily, the Maine State Historic Preservation Office has the philosophy, we make history every day at Portsmouth. Oh, thank you, I love you, right? And built a building inside the building, right, kept the historic nature, but now the light machine shop, the artisans, the engineers are all in the same building next to 2 dry docks to get the throughput that we need, because as much as I love building buildings, or some of you refer to them as targets, the whole purpose of that is get that throughput of our nuclear submarines, and that's, as long as we keep that focus, that's why we have infrastructure to produce that combat power.
Right. Ruther, I know from my former life at MARAD that your agency has experienced many of these challenges. for instance, in repairing and even simply berthing vessels. What are your thoughts on them?
So thanks, Tony. Good morning, everyone. I am going to digress just for 30 seconds here. So this is my first time at Sierra in space. This is my first time talking to an audience like this. And I'm going to say this because of what Tony said in his opening comments, which is I typically look at the commercial side of things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our ready reserve fleet. We have 48 to 50 ships out there. These ships sit in ports that are public ports. Some of them are private ports. 18 of them are strategic ports, and that's how we define them, so that they're ready on demand when the need rises. However, speaking of demand, we have a competing priority in maritime on the commercial side for ports. When you think about looking at a port, we have to compete with our economic security and our national security. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later in this panel. However, we also have another competing priority, which is what are the demands of that port? So when you think about a port, they're thinking about their business line. And then we come in and say, hey, we need to borrow your berth, or we need to dock here. But that competing priority also helps drive the economy. So when you think, again, about the economic security that we look at, these are the things that are important. So with that, I want to talk about what also Tony mentioned, which is supply chain. As we all know, supply chain became the word of 2021, I guess, would be the year. 2020 started it, but 2021, everyone knew what this meant. We all knew what it meant many years ago. But when looking at supply chain from a navigable waterway system, we think of it from ports globally to ports nationally. We also focus on our inland waterway system. We think it's an underutilized system. We think there's more opportunity there, and that's one of our focuses for the future. However, again, the demand of the infrastructure is critical. Which we'll talk about is the assets that we have. We don't know what the demand is. We think we know, but again, mentioning that these are kind of public and private ports, we really don't have that information. And we're hoping for this next year to get and collect some of that information over the next year so that we could have a better demand signal of what the needs are. The only other thing I wanted to mention is, Tony and I are both in the U.S. Department of Transportation. One of the things that makes MARAD unique is half of our funds come from the National Defense Authorization. The other portion comes from the Department of Transportation, which is under multiple titles. And I know more about that side of the house, and I could talk about it probably forever and ever. But that makes us unique in the sense that when you're looking at funding, you have to balance those two sources of funding. And they have different responsibilities. They come in very differently, but it creates a demand for us on how to balance that resource. So I think it's a little bit of everything, very similar to what the Admiral said. I think we have just some competing priorities with infrastructure needs, but mostly funding.
Good. So this is my 7th time speaking at Sierra Space, and my advice is just don't do too good of a job because they'll bring you back each year, right?
Thanks, Tony.
So, Roger, you're our one and only panelist from outside of the government. That means you're going to get all the hard questions at the end. You see these challenges any differently?
I don't think that I see these challenges differently. Oh, sorry, let me give my disclaimer. Any brilliant ideas you hear, that is excellent policy per Hanwha. Anything where you're like, that guy's crazy, that's Roger Camp's personal opinion, just for anybody writing notes. So I see a lot in common. And actually, Mark just gave me a great idea right when we were talking right before the panel about something that he's dealing with in a public yard that is of concern for us as well. So first, infrastructure is a big issue. I have some awesome pictures of our shipyard. 1777, and I saw a British guy in the hallway. I don't know if the Royal Navy's in the room, but stand by to be insulted. 1777, where what is now Philly Shipyard built ships was at the base of Federal Street. 1777, the Hessians had occupied the city of Philadelphia. Fort Mifflin was occupied by Pennsylvania colonials and the Pennsylvania Navy, not the U.S. Navy. At the time, Mifflin was on an island, a swampy island. When we finally withdrew our forces, it was burning, bombarded, flooded. Across the Schuylkill River from Mifflin was League Island. And if you look on a NOAA chart today, you will see League Island where Philly Shipyard is. So what is Philly Shipyard today was a swampy mess. And for anybody in here that's read Freedom's Forge, there's a great story in there about it's either Knudsen or Kaiser on the banks of San Francisco Bay telling a steam shovel driver, drive into that mess and let's start filling in for a yard. Steam shovel disappears into the muck. They rescue the driver. That's the kind of conditions that existed at League Island. So today, what you see really doesn't exist in the form that you see it today until World War II. We have some awesome pictures of World War II. You can see the dry docks. We own dry dock 4 and 5. Those docks look exactly like they do today. Back then they had battleships. Today they have MARAD. We have one in SMV number 5 is in dock 4, and then we use dock 5 as a wet dock. That is got NSMVs 3 and 4, all going to MARAD, the customer, but eventually going to train our merchant mariners. Some of the headaches with that, infrastructure-wise, are not only at the yard, but also the ships those MARAD vessels are replacing are 30 years old. So the infrastructure has to exist at the maritime academies to accommodate a vessel with 21st century technology. The piers that were there, for instance, Empire State 7, when she left and we brought in the current Empire State, they needed a little bit different infrastructure. There's going to be the same issue if you go to Vallejo for Cal Poly, for the Maritime Institute there. So there are issues with the places to receive ships, as my American colleague already pointed out. For us in the docks, all our docks were NAVFAC certified when they were built, but frankly, the ships we're building now are Jones Act ships, and they're MARAD ships. So the NAVFAC tech warrant holders are not looking at us in the same way. They look at, I spent a year in Dry Dock 8, so that's why I'm pointing over at Mark. And Mark's got an awesome project going to renovate Dry Dock 8 that I'm kind of interested in hearing how it goes, because we have dry docks that are built similar time frame. And so that is an issue of infrastructure that's not just the Navy, it's commercial shipbuilders too. And I know I've got, some yards are newer than others. We have a sister shipyard in Korea. That yard was nothing but mud in Okpo Bay in 1973. I got a funny picture of a bunch of dudes just wandering around a muddy beach. And at 1973, I was alive then. Unlike Philly and the Gosport Navy Shipyard, which is the predecessor of his yard, those are all things where we've had to build new infrastructure and are still building new infrastructure. Sorry, long on that one, but second point, people need infrastructure too. So we have, Newport News Shipbuilding just built a parking garage. We have kind of a similar situation where, guess what, shipyards are on water. The rivers that are there kind of bound your yard. Our western boundary is the Schuylkill. Our southern boundary is the Delaware, and then we have a great company called Rhodes is on the east side of us. So there are some relative boundaries of where the yard can go. So we have 2 large employee parking lots, and we're looking at how do we, we want to make sure Philly gets cold in the winter, lots of ice. The last thing you want to do after working 8 hours, 10 hours welding, probably 8, is walk across a freezing cold shipyard in wind, snow, and ice a long distance to parking. We want to make sure our people are getting treated well. Well, that means we can't just say, hey, we're closing down this parking lot, we're building a building, and everybody walk. So we're looking at how do we handle that. Newport News built a parking garage. Mark had a cool idea I just heard about from him about kind of a Rector set parking to kind of double your parking capacity. So these are all ideas that, and as the Admiral already said, how much money do we invest? Where's the priority? Some ideas we're just not going to do because the return isn't there. And then, so that's part of people, but another part is training people. There's an awesome facility in Okpo where anybody here ever painted their own bathroom or bedroom? And maybe when you were done, you're like, I really don't like the workmanship on that, but it's your work, so you're going to stick with it. We don't have that luxury in shipbuilding. And maritime paint's a lot more expensive than what you go get at Home Depot to paint your bathroom. Trust me, I know. Did it twice. My bathroom, not a ship. that paint's expensive to apply, and for anybody that was like a deck seaman, you know the traditional job for newly reporting aboard is, if it doesn't move, paint it gray. So, but we don't have that luxury, so we have to train painters. It takes about 6 weeks in Oakpo to take a new employee and train them to be a painter. How do we do that? We have a VR painting system. That requires infrastructure. That requires not only a building devoted to training those painters, but also the electronics inside. Imagine like you're playing a video game. You put on your goggles, we give you a paint sprayer and a paintbrush, and we make those new painters practice painting with paint that costs $0 before we let them actually get hold of the expensive paint. So that's an important part of infrastructure, is training your people so they have the tools they need to execute their jobs. And then kind of related to that is the facilities. Been talking with a couple robotics guys yesterday, and there's this perception, wrongly I think, that we're going to be replaced by AI, and we're going to be replaced by robots. And if you've ever used ChatGPT, it pretty much acts like somebody's drunk cousin after a fraternity party. I would not recommend you just say, my job's getting taken over by ChatGPT. I don't see that just yet. But we need to use those tools. Also, we need to have those tools, those cobots and robots, to supplement our workforce. My Shipyard CEO, who's sitting on a panel here next hour, has said, I'm not looking to replace human welders with robotic welders. I need those robotic welders. I need the cobots that work with humans to augment, because we have about 300 welders. We need more. There are folks down in Danville training more, and we have some of those guys now, but there's just not enough flow through. And so we have to have technical infrastructure, not just piers, not just buildings, but the actual facilities to be able to augment the humans that build our ships.
All right, thanks, Roger. And as a guy who does his own painting and own home repair, my wife has already told me that if I were a contractor, she would have fired me a long time ago. Please don't tell her about AI or robots, because she would replace me in a heartbeat. Admiral, let's go back to you. The Navy refers to its installations as platforms for power projection. How is the naval shore infrastructure positioned to meet the challenge of training, equipping, and maintaining naval forces?
Yeah, another great question, really builds on what I talked about before. So, I'll start off by saying, ships and submarines get underway every day. We train sailors every day. So our shore infrastructure right now, is acting as a power projection platform, as you described. However, due to the challenge that I talked about, not always as efficiently and effectively as we would like. So we have to improve our shore infrastructure. And I'll talk about 3 primary ways we're looking to do that. One of them is best prioritizing the resources we do have, so ensuring that the money that we do have is getting spent on the most critical infrastructure. A second way has to do with acquisition strategies. So historically, the way that we have constructed and repaired infrastructure was very traditional. We come up with a design, we put it on the street, contractors bid on it, and we get the work done. And in many cases, that works very well. But particularly as we've had more complex infrastructure to work on, that's not always the best way to do it. So we're doing things like early contractor involvement, where we bring the construction contractors on much earlier in the design process to provide input in the design. That's really important, especially on really complex projects where the cost and schedule is less about what you're building, but about how you have to build it. And getting the construction contractors involved early is very helpful in helping to mold that design. Another approach that we're working on and implementing is something I would call it design build to budget. So design build is where you award a contract to a construction contractor who's responsible for both the design and the construction. Taking that another step, you award that also with some sort of a target price, so that throughout the design process you can focus towards keeping that within budget, where we've often had struggles. So just a couple examples of where we're looking at different strategies on how to do the contracting for the construction and maintenance more effectively than we've done maybe in the past, more agile, and where we can really take advantage of the ideas of industry, so bring their innovation into our design early on. And a third way we're trying to do this better has to do with alternate ways of actually doing the construction. So I'll give you an example. I think one of the areas where we're going to see a lot of innovation, not only in our infrastructure, but I think across our nation, has to do with what I would call industrialized construction or off-site type construction. Sometimes it's called modular. And that's where, instead of doing our traditional, what we generally do in the United States is, get a bunch of construction workers on the site, have, bricks and mortar delivered, and they construct a project. If you look at how, particularly in Europe, a lot of construction is done in a very different way, where you actually prefabricate the parts in some off-site location and then bring them on and really assemble them on site. In Europe, about 45% of their construction is done that way. In the United States, it's about 5%, so much different. But there is, for certain types of projects, we're seeing a lot of advantages to that type of construction. Things like, one area is things like child development centers or barracks, dorms for sailors that have some sort of modular component where you can construct a lot of that on site and bring it onto the site is somewhat of a kit of parts. And we see potential for savings in cost and schedule of roughly 30% from those types. So we're aggressively going after those types of approaches. Even in the large dry docks we're building, actually, there's huge components, the size of 4-story apartment buildings that are being cast off-site and then brought to the location to essentially assemble on-site at a very grand scale. So those kind of approaches, again, looking at how we can do things better, smarter, and really leverage the innovation from industry to make best use of the resources we do have. Ultimately, after your first question is, how can we make our installations and the infrastructure for our installations the best it can be to support the maintenance of our platforms and the training of our sailors?
Tony, I'd add on one thing also. We've struggled for years explaining the connection between the infrastructure and Navy readiness. We talk in civil engineer speak, and well, tell me the day before the roof fails and you'll get money. But well, it's modeled anyhow. We always struggle because we can do, right? You can put the bucket under the roof. One of the things we had success in with the Shipyard Infrastructure Optimization Program, SIOP, is doing modeling and simulation of, hey, these shipyards, I like to use the term, that developed organically over time, right? We put the buildings wherever the heck they fit. We were able to demonstrate that over those 200 years, they've gotten so out of place that we're losing productivity in the shipyards by moving equipment and people all around, and hence we need to stack them in that waterfront production facility I mentioned. And we were able to demonstrate, hey, here's your return on investment. It's not just better for quality of life. It's not just because the buildings are old. You will get something back from this in the way of combat readiness, Navy, if you invest in your infrastructure. And that really helped change the equation and convince the Navy, hey, that marginal dollar I'll actually put to infrastructure instead of submarines or planes or ships or something else.
And that's interesting. So my agency, we oversee infrastructure on the St. Lawrence Seaway that leads between the Great Lakes and the Atlantic Ocean. In particular, we have a bridge and we own some locks up there. And I've got a fantastic team of engineering people, and what they do best for me is that predictability. Tell me when we need, my job is to go to the department and then eventually OMB and then eventually to Congress to look for resources to meet our strategic infrastructure needs. Please don't tell me on Tuesday that the roof is going to collapse on our maintenance shed, right? So one of the best things they do for me is let's play chess and not checkers. Let's predict well in advance when we're going to need to make these infrastructure investments. And through that sense, we could, one, maintain 99+% operational effectiveness, and then two, do so at a cost that's far more reasonable for the taxpayer. Mark, we're going to stay with you for a minute. World's getting more complicated. There's growing global challenges on the horizon, new platforms that are being fielded, and an ever expanding group of stations and places that the Navy needs to operate from. What are you doing to deliver improved infrastructure faster?
Admiral touched on a couple, and I'll mention them because we're in unexplored territory now with the type of construction that we're doing, both the magnitude, the size, right, the dry dock that we will probably build in the Pacific Northwest. Most of you have seen the Pentagon, fairly large building. This dry dock will take twice the amount of concrete in the Pentagon. I struggle to get my mind around that. And for some reason, NAVFAC won't shut the shipyard down for a decade to let us go do our construction work. So just, it's as much as the how are you going to build it is besides what, and the what's not easy either. Chief mentioned the early contractor involvement. In the past, construction's a competitive business. It's not jet fighters, it's not nuclear submarines. We put a solicitation out, we get bids in, we award best value. What we've learned now, and at the dry dock that's under construction in Pearl, it's about 25% done now. We brought a set of contractors in at 25% or 65%. Give us some ideas, 65% design of how to build it. By the way, about half of them say do precast, the other half say no, do Chromey concrete. But you work through that. For this one in the Northwest, we brought them in before 15%. Start talking us through what equipment, how many dredges are going to be coming in, to learn the how we're going to do it so we can shape the RFP. The contracting, one project used to equal one contract. The industry just can't take that risk anymore. We can't obligate that much money at one time. So how do we break that up into multiple contracts? Play to the market, to the right contract, or the right risk along the way. So that's a big part of it. I mentioned the modeling and simulation. We're offering, in the weapons world, award fees, incentives, pretty standard. In construction, it's, hey, firm fixed price, go for it, guys, all the risk on you. People can't do that over 5-6 years. So how do you share that risk, allocate that risk with the contractors, with award fees, with economic price adjustments on I think on the dry dock and Pearl, there's 100 different things we're willing to adjust the price on, and then learn new ways. Naval reactors, usually you think of the most conservative folks around. They have been just a wonderful partner in different ways of doing maintenance on submarines, so we can go to industry and say, hey, how could we do this in a different way? Because the way we've been doing it for 30, 60 years may not be best. And then also, the next step is looking at some public-private ventures, so we don't have to do all of it. The example I cite right now is I buy a lot of specialized equipment to bring inside the fence line on the shipyard so our artisans can work on it, right? You absolutely need it. These things take 2 years to build. Thankfully, most of them are built in the United States. I didn't know that until a congressperson asked me that. I better go look. 90% are built in the U.S. That's a great thing. But do I really need to own those, or do I need time? Does the shipyard need time on those? And maybe we put it right outside the fence line, right? Or put it on the fence line, and some other shipyard, I just met my new best friend, could rent time on it, right? And then we could rent time on it, but we don't have to own it, and that change that paradigm and do things a little bit faster.
All right, well, since he's your new best friend, I asked you, Mark, about global challenges. Roger, I want to talk to you a little bit about global opportunities. So Hanwha just made a significant investment in purchasing Philly Shipyard, where MARAD built its national security multi-mission vessels. Am I correct in assuming that while I'm sure you saw value in a shipyard as a standalone functional asset, is there an additional value or force multiplier to have that shipyard aligned with some of your other global activities?
So short answer, yes. Longer answer, so for anybody out there, and I'm sure there's a few in the room, when you bought your first house, you said, probably you and your spouse if you bought it together, I love this house, this place is awesome, and then here's some things I want to do with it. Well, so kind of think about the shipyard that way. Philly Shipyard has, we delivered 32 ships since I think 2003. So we have a pedigree at Philly of building great ships for MARAD and for Jones Act. But like when you bought that first house and you said, this is great, and I got some ideas, that is what Hanwha was thinking, and I'm kind of paraphrasing for them. So Hanwha acquired Philly Shipyard in December, and I joined the company in February. So I'm giving you a little bit of my translation of what was explained to me about how the process happened. But just like anybody, when you look to the future, you don't think about all I have is what I have now. Anybody that's got a high schooler, I've got several, what they are at 17 is a lot different than what they are at 21. And so likewise, that's our view at the shipyard is it's an awesome shipyard. We build awesome ships, but we want to extend that out. And so right now, to do that, we deliver at Philly about a ship to a ship and a half a year. Our affiliate shipyard, Okpo Bay, is the largest shipyard in the free world outside the People's Republic of China, delivers 40 plus ships a year. So that's nearly a ship every week and a half. Now, they're different kinds of ships. So it's not an apples to apples comparison, but understand that Hanwha Ocean, another company within Hanwha, they have a way of building ships that actually our NAVFAC commander just described, and thanks for that description. It saves me having to give it. But so some of those techniques we do at Philly already. Some of those techniques we don't do yet. And that's an important part of this process is that we say we leverage the best of what we can from across the company. And so we take a great shipyard and make it better. And I'm sorry, a little long-winded, but I think that's the answer to your question.
Oh, that's right. I don't have a gong back here. Well, this is where the conversation gets interesting. And shout out to Julie Simpson at the Navy League for putting together this panel, because we have the perspectives from the Navy on infrastructure. We have the perspectives of a defense contractor, like I said earlier. And now, Tretha, let's go to you. And from a commercial perspective, can you give me your thoughts on supporting commercial infrastructure investments? And I'm going to caveat it. Given the limitations that we have on federal funding and the urgent demands of maritime infrastructure, how is your agency working to assess what assets we already have across ports, shipyards, vessels, and the workforce, and how do we identify where our true gaps exist, and where should we triage our resources?
Thanks, Tony. Okay, so Tony opened up the question. Who's on the commercial side in the room? Okay, who's on the Navy side?
Like being at a wedding.
Okay. Who feels like they actually support both? Okay. So I always find opportunities where I can hopefully educate a little bit more about what we do to address what Tony had asked. And what this means is you can't look at anything in a specific silo, right? So our demands are much greater than our resources. And I can say that from a resource workforce. We can say it from our land base, if we need to have land. We can say it from our port infrastructure, and so on and so forth. So the critical question for us right now, I'm going to go back to what I said in my opening statement, which is our demand. We need to assess what the assets are. And from a Department of Transportation perspective, in my old life, we always looked at this as what's the state of good repair. You want to, in highways, you don't want to build more capacity. You don't want to build a new road unless you really have to. You would rather fix what you have. So that's where we kind of are. And is there capacity in port infrastructure? We don't know. What's the demand for that capacity? So what I kind of want to talk about is the funding that we have available within the Department of Transportation for the commercial port side of infrastructure. So as some of you may know, the Secretary testified last week in front of the Senate EPW, Environment and Public Works Committee. And the entire committee, the entire hearing was about grants and grant agreements and getting money out the door. This is the part where my office, the Port Infrastructure Development Program, resides. And it is a federal program that is a competitive grant program that we compete annually. So who knows in the room the first year that an ports were eligible for funding directly for port infrastructure? What year was that? Anybody, just throw a guess out there. Was it 1990? Was it 2000? 2019. 2019 was the year we got federal funding. 2020 was the first year the grants went out. Now, there was other capabilities in the department under the Highway Trust Fund, under the highway programs that we had, which was where ports were eligible, again, going back to 2009. But to have direct funding was 2019. What makes this important was then when the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or the IIJA, Investment Jobs Act, was where we actually got dedicated funding, which was $450 million just for port infrastructure development. In addition, we received $25 million for our marine highway program. What's the demand that we typically see per year for those grant programs? Just say out of our, because it's also compensated with the NDAA, our National Defense Authorization. So we get about a $200 million in the past for port infrastructure. That has decreased over the last 2 fiscal years. What do you think the demand is? Is it 10 times, 2 times, 3 times, 50 times when we get our grants? 20%? 20 times? How about 600? Our demand is 600. So what that tells us, without even doing any asset management, is we know the demand is out there. We have the need to fix our infrastructure. And we look at this from a commercial navigable system. If we want to be globally competitive, we want to support our Navy, our defense, our military assets, we need to focus on our infrastructure. I raise this so that you understand that in 2026, the funding expires. We will be going through a reauthorization. We will be looking, what does this mean for the future of port infrastructure? I say to you, I think it's important that we collaborate together on these needs and resources as we think about what would happen with, looking at shipbuilding. What is that going to mean on the demand of port infrastructure on the commercial and on the military side? Thanks.
So to wrap up, I'm just going to throw a jump ball at the panelists.
Oh.
Let's talk a little bit about collaboration and partnerships. Mark, maybe we start with you.
Sure, I alluded to a couple of them. We've got a few more that we're working. That early contractor involvement, learning from the industry is a big part of it. That tends to be within the construction industry. We put out a RFI a couple months ago. My colloquialism is who would want to go halvesies with us on a floating dry dock, where the Navy would like to increase capacity, something beyond phase 0, but we wouldn't need it all the time, so it wouldn't make sense for us to put all appropriated funds in. Would it benefit somebody else, a commercial shipbuilder, to also invest in new port facilities, in dry docking facilities? That's one aspect we're getting at. We have always owned the electric and water infrastructure on our Navy bases. Is that really core to what the Navy does? So NAVFAC and the other services have done utilities privatization in many places. We happen to work those through the Defense Logistics Agency, and the sources sought has gone out to privatize the electric capacity at Norfolk Naval Shipyard. How much appropriated funds should we bring in as a military construction project, or how much would commercial industry be willing to invest or invest with us over time, and then maintain it, right? And take those workers and those dollars and put them to somewhere else in the Navy. That would be part of it. Various administrations have talked about a fifth shipyard. Would it make sense for us to build one, or should we focus on the 4 we have? Or, again, is there some public-private venture that would want to open a new shipyard and invest in some with the Navy? NAVFAC has had great success where we have underutilized land at key places around the Navy and doing an enhanced use lease to make that maybe waterfront property available to private industry. The Navy gets some in-kind, and especially as we're trying to build our infrastructure, our maritime infrastructure across the United States. If the Navy can contribute land, somebody else contributes capital. Those exist. Preliminary stages on many of those, but what key waterfront facilities do we have? Pier spaces, the shipyards now, when they're not being used, have the legal authority to make them available, spaces available to commercial. We've docked some cruise ships in the dry dock before when they needed it. It helps both parties out. So it's what's limited by imagination and law, but how do we work within the current legal confines, and then right now, what other business savvy aspects would the administration be interested in? There's great possibilities out there.
Okay, so we're down to the speed dating round because I want to save some time for audience questions. Any other quick thoughts on collaboration or partnerships?
Can I take that one?
Absolutely.
So that's probably the one thing that is imperative in our office. As you have heard, I don't build anything. I don't really operate anything. Our strategic sea lift office does. I have a lot of colleagues in the office, or in the audience here. So we are a promotional and advocacy agency. We have the ability to help and see what's out there, and collaborate is critical. Why, when thinking about this collaboration process, how do we know where to send the funds and what to do? So there's different levels of collaboration. We have our internal collaboration. Like I said, of course, I see Matt Buttram sitting here, and what do we do for our strategic sea lift ports? We collaborate with them, but we also work hand in hand with those ports that have our ships. But in addition, I see Lauren in the audience, and she's a member of our National Advisory Committee. We rely on the industry. We rely on them helping us and informing us, because if we can't, we don't know everything, right? But we also need to know what the demand is from their perspective, so that they can help us as we think about going into reauthorizations and funding, and where should we put our priorities. Additionally, legislation has provided us an opportunity of looking at strategies. I was going to talk about the National Maritime Strategy a little bit, but there's also a requirement under the USDOT that we have a national freight strategy. How do these compete? How do they compare? How do they align, right? Because we don't have endless pots of money. Funding is very critical right now. We're at a point where we're looking at what are those demands and what are the opportunities. So I think collaboration and working across lines is critical to the future of this industry.
Right. So I've got a comment on that, but I got to follow up on what Tree pointed out. One of Nova Navy League's finest, Lauren in the house back there. Good to see ya. So on collaboration, public-private partnership, Hanwha Philly Shipyard exists because of public-private partnership. So anybody here, Navy veterans, did firefighting training or buttercup training at what was Philly? If you did, that is now a tasty cake factory and distribution center. So sorry to crush your dreams of going back to firefighting school. The part of the yard that we have looks a lot like it did. A lot of the rest of the yard has changed, but there's a Philadelphia, PIDC, and forgive me, I forgot the I, but it's the Philadelphia something Infrastructure Development Corporation. So we have to work with PIDC. But in the 90s, the Navy transferred, in the course of the BRAC, transferred what was Philly Naval Shipyard to the PIDC, and then in turn, the predecessor owners of Philly worked with PIDC to get the yard in kind of the form that it exists today, and then it's kind of gone through a couple iterations since then. But what you see, Hanwha Philly Shipyard today, only is there because of the Navy working with the local community and then working with industry to get the yard that's there today.
Great, thanks. So I have an iPad here with questions from the audience. If I don't cover your question very well, or you have additional questions, just please stand up. We can make this a collaborative discussion. So the first question is, how is the Navy addressing the challenges posed by rising sea levels, flooding, and other water-related risks to our shore infrastructure and shipyards?
I can jump on that one first. So, we're not alone here. The Navy has the same problems that the rest, any sort of, our ports in general are facing. So, a lot of it's just done by, building code continues to evolve. We're building things at higher elevations. We've recently completed a project at Norfolk Naval Shipyard where we raised the height of the walls around our dry docks as well as our utility tunnels to protect those from water. So largely it's just, building our piers higher in some cases. So just trying to forecast what the sea level might do, which is imperfect, but trying to construct infrastructure that's ultimately going to be resilient to what we think may happen with sea levels in the future.
We have accounted for that in the design of the shipyards, which tend to be very close to the water. I know we also struggle in Guantanamo Bay with it. So on average, everything we're building at the shipyards at the waterfronts is 3.5 feet higher. Each of the shipyards are a little different. It's interesting, Puget Sound actually is the ground is coming up, and is the ground coming up, the water coming up at the same rate. We're moving a lot of the utilities up on top instead of hung underneath the piers. I think it was Admiral Cottle who said the dry docks are only good if they stay dry. We've had to protect a lot of the pumps. The electrical transformers are all raised up now. The flood wall around four of the dry docks down in Norfolk, very similar to what New York did with their subway system. And we tend to focus on, and certainly I do, on the wet side. We also see at a lot of our air bases the desertification of those, right? Groundwater dropping in places like Lemoore. Yuma started out pretty dry and is just getting drier. So that side of the business as well. Our expeditionary forces, how are they going to get fresh water in places that no longer have it, especially small South Pacific islands? It's part of how you deal with war fighting or hauling fuel that far as well, right? An Army and a Marine Corps runs on fuel, so how do you get that inland as well is a big part of the problem.
Good. How do we create a talent pipeline for young people to pursue shipbuilding as a career?
Builder.
So this is a great question, and actually Captain Jesse Black out here, he should be on this panel next year. He and I were talking about this last night. So, and actually the most recent CEO of Newport News Shipbuilding Jen, she had a great quote about how shipbuilding is dark, dirty, and dangerous work. And so if we don't pay shipbuilders more than they can get working Uber or something else, and that's an unfortunate exaggeration. Trust me, like what we pay welders is pretty awesome. I've seen some college graduates that 4-year degree in hand making less than somebody that does a 16-week welding course. But those are difficult challenges because straight up, people like to have money to feed themselves, buy a jet ski, buy a house for their family. They kind of need those things, I guess. So we have to have competitive salaries. That's tough to do. There's some legislation out now. SAWS is the acronym, SAWS. And so both Let's see. I think Mr. Wicker and Mr. Kelly have both talked about it, so I will leave kind of the descriptions to them. But the idea is that the government augments the shipyards that are bidding on work, because obviously, as a competitive shipyard, we want to come to the government and say, hey, we're giving you good value for the taxpayer dollar. One of the ways we kind of shorthand that is to say, we're less expensive than our competitors. Please award the work to us. So, in that competitive environment, it caps what we can do for salary. So the SAWS legislation is intended to say, hey, we want to preserve the competitive nature of shipbuilding. We want to make sure the government is protecting the taxpayer dollar. We want to make sure the government is getting the best value for the dollar. But we also want to make sure that folks that work in the industry are also being paid competitive salaries. So that's one way. But also, I mentioned earlier the conveniences of life. I'm coming back to the parking garage. But parking is a big deal. When I was at Norfolk Naval Shipyard for a year, it's where the ship's company guys park. You got a pretty good walk to get into the environment, into the dock where they do the work. The challenge is, so again, you have to have good return on investment. So we have to figure out how do we best support our workers in the yards and give them best quality of life possible. And actually, Denton Shipbuilding, they have a great, what started out as kind of a nursing station decades ago is now basically a small hospital clinic that they provide free of charge to all the employees at Denton's. It's actually a really cool thing. Okpo, they actually have a hospital with an MRI scanner, so I was kind of shocked when I saw this little hospital on the yard. So those are things that we do to help retain employees. I'm sorry. I want to go back to ATDM, Danville, Virginia. End of March, they're having the Advanced Manufacturing Center of Excellence is hosting a summit. If you get a chance to go, it is a great facility. The government pays for that facility. So right now, and I see some colleagues from other shipyards here, several of us in the room, our yards either send employees to go to Danville to get trained, or there's job fairs and we hire graduates or about to graduate students out of the program. And there's two guys at the show here who have sons that one just graduated, another son is in the program right now. These are great programs, and I know I've got 2 girls in college and one heading that way this fall. I understand that there's a lot of pressure in high schools to tell people, hey, you need to go to college. It's your best way to a good salary. As I said, 16 weeks of welding school, there are welders out there, first day on the job at the yard, getting base pay that's better than some college graduates. I don't think that message is clear, and I get it. Like, I'm a dad sending kids to college. I get the pressure. So that's another important part of it, and giving them the tools they need. I talked about the VR painting. If we don't train people to be able to do the job, it's not really fair of us as leaders to say, hey, you didn't do it right, when we didn't set them up in the first place. So I think those are all, and when folks see that, when they see that we care, and that, hey, this isn't just a job, there's the We Build Giants campaign. We're not going to win on just, hey, you're getting a paycheck. People have to care about this job. They have to know that we care about them. So that, I realize that's more of a philosophy thing than kind of an infrastructure solution.
All right.
Can I just add? I just want everybody to think about something. In DOT, there is actually funding in different agencies that actually fund workforce programs. In the maritime world, we don't, outside of the academy, but we don't really have that for shipbuilding, for some of the trade programs that could be the future of where the country is going with shipbuilding and port infrastructure and things like that. So I would just say that if there are resources and examples of how the federal government could support this great demand that we're going to have.
Sorry, I got to jump on that too, and this is totally unrelated to infrastructure, but so one of the things I learned as providing ships to the maritime academies is most of the students there pay their own way. It's not like a service academy where you're there on scholarship. So actually, Tote Services, are the vessel construction manager, they just funded 2 scholarships. So a lot of the students at the maritime academies, our future mariners, are having to find their own way to pay their way through college, like anybody else going to college. It's not something that I was aware of until a few weeks ago.
Yeah, so support your maritime academies, and our secretary was up at the Merchant Marine Academy recently for that purpose. Support maritime high schools. I've recently visited a maritime high school in Buffalo, and a lot of young men and women that are going to eventually be in our industry. So my advice for anybody who is in this business, whether you're on the Navy side or whether you're on a commercial side, support the academies, support the high schools. Go out there and get your talent for the future. Now, we're out of time. I'm cool with hanging out for a little bit. Are all of you okay?
Good.
All right. Are there any additional questions from the audience? Sir. Automated inspections at shipyards?
I don't even know what, yeah. It's the Navy.
Wasn't of the facilities. I think you'd have to ask the people who maintain the ships.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Any additional last-minute questions? Sir?
Yes, sir. My name is Edward Hayes. I'm with Leidos. And I know after spending 30 years in the Navy and going through a lot of shipyards, one of the hardest things is when you bring the kids or the sailors in there, they don't have any of the luxuries or things that they normally would have. Internet or things like that are very hard to bear the little trailers that we put them in while they take care of the ship and everything. What plans do you have for improving that type of infrastructure, the IT infrastructure, and especially nowadays as more technical things are happening on the ships, AR and everything with the construction? How do you plan to increase that capability for the bases, for the shipyards, and that kind of thing?
Well, thanks for your service. Anybody want to get on this question?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because often dry docks suck all the air out of the room and we don't get to the rest of the infrastructure. As Roger mentioned, and I wish I had a way of quantifying it, but parking, food service, not wandering all around to get your CAC updated, right? Being able to see the nurse when you need that. That has to have an effect on, do I want to work here? You walk in, wow, those are beautiful buildings built in the 1800s, right? Do I really want to work in those? So a big part, after we get through the waterfront, right, we got to catch up with the shipbuilding, is to improve the quality of service, right? Partially for efficiency, partially to hire and retain people. I can show you the plan for Pearl Harbor where and I'm going to get the numbers wrong, the 1,600 spot parking garage goes, the 1,800 spot parking garage. We know where they're going. We know where they're going to be sequenced. We know how we move the fence line around. We know where the food service ID card center is, where all the community service is in one spot. We are rebuilding the IT infrastructure along with the electricity, the water, to the power of the next generation. Right now at some of the shipyards, we use 8-part carbon paper. I didn't know you could buy that anymore. To track the parts around the shipyard, or sort of track them. Under contract right now across the 4 shipyards, we're installing 8,000 antennas that'll track RFID tags on all the parts, right? We're bringing ourselves into the 21st century like Walmart has, so we know where all those parts are. You punch in the number and you go, it's in warehouse number 3 and it went through the door on this date. So that is all part of rebuilding the shipyards, absolutely. Waterfront, yes, but all the upland and underground stuff for the sailors and for those 37,000 employees who come through that gate every day and look for a place to park. Yeah.
All right. Well, great questions. If we go any longer, I'm going to have to pay these folks overtime. So I want to thank you all for being a great audience. I'm going to be here the rest of the day. I don't know, are you folks going to hang out for a little bit? So please, if you have some additional follow-up, come up to the stage. We'll talk to you afterwards. And thank you again.